I didn't know I'd remember the sound of her voice more than anything else. Low, even, not the kind that demands attention, yet somehow it stays in your chest, as though your ribs have to hold it. The first time I noticed her, I was standing in the smell of engine oil and coffee that had sat too long on a hot plate. The shop wasn't quiet, tools clattering, radios humming, but the moment she stepped inside, the air thinned. Not dramatic, not movie-like. Just a shift I felt and couldn't explain. She walked with the kind of ease people earn, not inherit. Shoulders squared, dark hair pinned back loosely, sunglasses pushed on top of her head like she'd forgotten them there. She wore a simple blouse, faded jeans, nothing remarkable. And yet, her eyes found me before I was ready for them. A glance too direct, too certain. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you work here?" I nodded, clearing my throat faster than I meant to. Yeah, I do." She smiled. Brief. Enough to make me feel like I'd answered wrong. "I need someone to look at my car. It's making this noise. I don't know how else to explain it." She gestured with one hand, circling in the air as though that would describe the sound. It was awkward and perfect because I realized I was staring at the way her fingers moved instead of listening. I followed her outside to the parking lot, scribbling half-legible notes onto the clipboard just to look busy. Her car was nothing fancy, 10 years old, a little sun-faded, the kind people keep because it's reliable. But when she leaned against the hood, arms crossed, watching me check the engine, the heat pressed down differently. "You look too young to be fixing cars," she said suddenly. I glanced up, caught off guard. "Too young. She tilted her head, a smile in her voice more than her face. "What are you, 20? 23, I said. "Does that make a difference?" She shrugged, but didn't answer. Silence stretched, filled with the ticking metal of the cooling engine. I should have said something else, but I found myself tightening bolts that didn't need tightening, just to stay bent over, away from her eyes. Then she did something small, small enough no one else would have noticed. She shifted closer, just a step, her shadow falling across my hands. "You're careful," she said softly. "Most people rush through things. You don't." I didn't know what to do with that. My throat went dry, and all I managed was, "I don't like mistakes." Her lips pressed together like she was hiding a thought, maybe a laugh, maybe something heavier. And then she let the silence come back, letting me feel it instead of filling it. I finished the inspection, gave her the usual rundown, belts, fluids, nothing serious. She thanked me with that same measured calm, like she was always half a step ahead of me. But as she turned to go, her hand brushed mine when I passed her the keys. Just a brush. Skin against skin for half a second too long to be nothing. I told myself it was accidental. I tried to. That night, when the shop closed and the smell of grease finally lifted from my clothes, I kept replaying it. Not her words, not the way she looked leaning against her car. Just the light, impossible touch. And I couldn't stop asking myself why it felt like the start of something I wasn't supposed to want the second time I saw her. It wasn't about the car. She came back to the shop a week later, holding a paper bag like it was evidence in a trial. "I thought I'd return this," she said, setting down a small wrench on the counter. "You left it in the trunk when you checked my car." I hadn't realized I'd forgotten it. She could have tossed it, and I never would have noticed. Instead, she'd carried it back. "You didn't have to," I said. Her shoulders lifted in a quick shrug. "I don't like keeping things that don't belong to me." There was no smile this time. Just that quiet firmness, the kind that didn't invite argument. She looked more tired than before, hair a little undone, eyes ringed faintly like she hadn't slept well. Still, she carried herself the same way, upright, composed, as though weariness had no right to pull her down. I asked if she wanted a coffee while I checked over the wrench, pretending to make sure it wasn't damaged. She hesitated, glanced toward the door like she had somewhere better to be. Then she said, "Fine, just a small one." We sat at the little table in the corner of the shop, two plastic chairs, a scratched surface, the smell of gasoline hanging in the air. She wrapped both hands around the paper cup, even though the coffee was too hot. Her fingers tightened every time she lifted it, like the warmth was the only thing keeping her there. "You run this place alone?" she asked. "Most days," I said. "My uncle owns it, but he's sick." I cover shifts. She nodded slowly, looking down into her cup. I thought she might say something more, but her lips pressed thin instead. For a moment, I wondered if I'd said the wrong thing. You don't talk much, she said finally. I don't know what to say most of the time. That earned me the faintest laugh, short, almost disbelieving. She shook her head and sipped her coffee again. I watched the way her fingers lingered on the rim afterward, the way she bit the inside of her cheek as if second-guessing herself. There was something about her stillness that drew me in. Like every movement was measured, intentional. And yet I caught the small cracks, the restless tapping of her foot, the quick swallow before she spoke, the way her gaze kept drifting away as though afraid of being seen too clearly. At one point, her hand slipped from the cup, brushing against the table. For a second, it stayed there, close to mine. I didn't move. Neither did she. The air between our hands felt louder than the whole shop. Then she pulled back, almost too quickly. I should go, she said, standing before her chair had stopped squeaking. She thanked me again for the wrench, voice quieter this time, and walked out without looking back. But all I could think about, long after the door closed, was that single unfinished moment, her hand near mine, her guard almost down, and how close it felt to something we both weren't ready to admit. But it was late when she came in again. Rain tapped against the shop windows, the kind of steady drizzle that makes the air heavy and everything smell faintly of wet concrete. I was closing up, lights half off, broom in hand, when I heard the door creak. "You're still here?" she asked. Her hair was damp, clinging at the ends. She wore a long coat, open just enough to show a blouse wrinkled from the day. She looked softer somehow, stripped of that usual composure. "Yeah," I said, setting the broom aside, trying to keep the place from turning into a junkyard. She smiled faintly, but it didn't hold. Instead, she leaned against the counter, tapping her nails once, then folding her arms. I didn't know where else to go. Something in her voice pulled me up short. Not weakness exactly, more like honesty slipping through before she could stop it. "You okay?" I asked. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked away, toward the rain-slick glass. "Just noisy at home." I wanted to ask more, but she turned suddenly, changing the subject. "Do you ever think about leaving this place? Doing something else?" "All the time," I admitted. But leaving and knowing where to go aren't the same thing. That got a real laugh out of her, small but alive. She shook her head, pushing damp hair back behind her ear. The movement revealed a curve of her neck, pale under the harsh shop light. I looked too long, and she must have felt it, because her eyes flicked back to mine and lingered. The air grew close, heavy with something neither of us named. She stepped toward the workbench, trailing her fingers over the scattered tools like she needed something to do with her hands. "You're careful," she said again, repeating what she'd told me before. I don't know many people like that. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't careful at all, not with her standing this close. That every part of me was a knot I couldn't undo. But before I could, her phone buzzed on the counter. The sound sliced through the moment. She glanced down, and I saw a name flash across the screen. Mark. She silenced it quickly, too quickly, and slipped the phone into her pocket. Her face had changed. The guarded lines were back, shoulders drawn in. "I should go," she said, not looking at me. I nodded, trying to pretend my chest wasn't tight with questions. She moved toward the door, hand on the handle, then paused. Her coat brushed against my arm when she turned back. We were closer than we'd ever been. Close enough that I could see the tired shimmer in her eyes, the hesitation she tried to hide. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Neither did I. Then she whispered, barely audible, "This is a mistake." And before I could say a word, she was gone into the rain, leaving me staring at the empty doorway, wondering what exactly almost happened between us. She came back on a Thursday evening, just before closing. The rain from the night before had given way to stillness. No sound outside except the occasional car rolling past, the street lamps flickering against the glass. I was wiping grease off my hands when the door opened, and there she was again. No coat this time, just a dark sweater and jeans. She looked as though she'd come straight from somewhere she didn't want to be. "You shouldn't keep showing up here," I said before I could stop myself. My voice wasn't unkind, but it carried more weight than I meant. She shut the door behind her and leaned against it, arms crossed. You think I don't know that? We just looked at each other then, the silence filling every corner of the shop. I couldn't read her expression. It wasn't anger, wasn't sadness. Something in between, stretched tight. I picked up a rag, turned it in my hands. Then why? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked further inside, stopping near the workbench where I'd left a socket set scattered. She touched one of the wrenches, moving it a fraction of an inch, then let it go. Finally, she said, because it's quiet here, and because you don't ask questions I can't answer. Her words landed heavy. I wanted to reach for her, not with my hands, but with something, anything, that could break through the distance she kept wrapped around herself. I stepped closer, enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume under the sharp scent of oil and metal. She didn't move away. What are we doing? She asked suddenly. Her voice cracked. Not much, but enough. My throat tightened. I don't know. The silence after that was worse than words. She stared at me, eyes wide but unreadable, waiting for something I couldn't give. My hands itched to close the space, but I stayed still. I'm old enough to know better, she said, softer now. You're young enough to walk away. So why are we both still standing here? The shop light buzzed above us. I swallowed hard, searching for an answer. The truth came out quieter than I intended. Because I don't want to leave when you're here. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. She just held my gaze, longer than anyone ever had, as if trying to see whether I meant it or not. I didn't move. Neither did she. The silence pressed harder, almost unbearable. Finally, she whispered, more to herself than to me. This can't end well, and yet I can't stop coming back. The words stayed between us, raw and unfixable, hanging heavier than any touch could have. It was supposed to be routine. Oil change, quick check, nothing more. She booked the last appointment of the day, as though she wanted the shop to be empty but couldn't say it out loud. I worked under the hood while she waited near the counter, arms folded, scrolling through her phone. The silence between us felt different now, charged, fragile, like one wrong word might crack it. When I came back inside to grab a filter, I noticed something. Her phone was on the counter, screen lit. A voicemail notification blinked. She didn't see me looking, but the preview flashed just long enough for me to catch a name. Daniel. Her hand darted out quickly, locking the screen, almost guilty. But the damage was already done. She caught me watching. For the first time since I'd known her, her composure slipped. Her face softened, then tightened, as though she'd been holding a secret too long and suddenly realized it was showing. Don't, she said quietly. Don't ask. I nodded, but something in me couldn't leave it. Not because I wanted to pry, because I couldn't stand the weight in her voice. She sat down, pressing both palms flat on the table. After a long pause, she spoke without looking at me. He was my husband, Daniel. He died 3 years ago. The words hung heavy, without drama. Just fact, laid bare. I froze where I stood, filter in one hand, rag in the other. I didn't know what to say. My chest ached, not from the confession itself, but from how matter-of-factly she forced it out, like pain had become routine for her. She gave a small, uneven laugh, though nothing was funny. I don't tell people that. It changes the way they look at me, like I'm fragile glass they can't put down too hard. Her hands trembled slightly against the table. I'd never seen her hands tremble before. Always steady, always controlled. I set the filter aside and sat across from her, not too close, not touching. Just there. I don't see glass, I said softly. I see someone who still walks in like she owns the room. She finally lifted her eyes to mine. They were wet, but not spilling over. A storm barely contained. Do you know why I keep coming here? She asked. I shook my head. Because you don't remind me of him. Not at all. But sometimes, when you laugh, when you look at me too long, I forget that I lost him, and then I hate myself for it. The silence after that was brutal. My throat closed up, my hands useless at my sides. I wanted to tell her it wasn't wrong. That forgetting wasn't betrayal. That maybe forgetting for a moment was the closest thing to healing she'd had in years. But all I managed was one line, quiet, almost broken. Then let me be the place where you don't have to remember. The shop was almost dark when it happened. The lights above the workbench flickered softly, leaving most of the room in shadow. I'd stayed late again, though there wasn't much left to do. Habit, or maybe an excuse to wait. She arrived without warning. No car trouble this time. No reason at all. Just her. She stepped inside like she'd rehearsed it, though the hesitation in her eyes gave her away. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured. "I know." We didn't move closer at first. She stood by the door. I leaned against the counter. The space between us felt impossibly loud, carrying all the things we hadn't said. Finally, she exhaled, shoulders falling in a way I'd never seen before. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know what it is, or what it should be. I only know I keep ending up here." Her words hit something inside me, because they were my words too, if I'd been brave enough to say them. "You don't have to know," I said. "Maybe it's not about knowing." For a long moment, we just stared. Her face looked softer than ever, stripped of every mask she'd worn. Tired, yes, but also honest. I felt it in my chest, in the way my breath stuttered just from standing still. She crossed the room slowly, not rushed, not hesitant either, just deliberate, like every step was a choice. When she stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the fine lines around her eyes, she let out a breath that trembled on the way out. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." The admission seemed to settle something between us. Her hand brushed against mine, light at first, then staying. Not a grab, not possession, just presence. Warm, human. We stood like that, hands barely touching, and I realized it was more intimate than anything else could have been. Because it wasn't about wanting, it was about letting ourselves be seen. No declarations, no promises, just a quiet collapse into the truth we'd both been circling. She leaned forward slightly, her forehead resting against mine. The smallest touch, but it stole the air from the room. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say that wouldn't break the moment. The silence was enough, louder than words, stronger than touch. When she finally pulled back, her eyes stayed locked on mine, steady and unflinching. "This changes everything," she said softly. "I know." And that was it. No grand finale, no perfect ending. Just two people standing in the half-light of a closed shop, finally admitting with silence what words could never carry. It's strange, the way some moments don't end when they're over. They keep living in the silence that follows, like a hum in the walls you can't unhear. That night in the shop, her hand brushing mine, her forehead against me. It wasn't a declaration or a promise, but it was real. And real has a way of staying. I think about her differently now. Not as a mystery I can't solve, or someone too far beyond me. I think about her as a person, flawed, guarded, carrying too much history, and yet still able to walk through my door and let herself be seen. And me? I used to believe love was about grand gestures. Big confessions, fireworks, certainty. But she taught me that sometimes it's just about staying. About showing up in the quiet, even when you don't have the right words. Especially when you don't. She never gave me an answer to the question she asked that first day. "Why do you want me?" Maybe she never will. But I understand now that wanting someone isn't always about reasons. Sometimes it's about recognition. The way you catch yourself in their silence. The way their presence unsettles and steadies you at the same time. What changed between us wasn't dramatic. There was no line crossed in a way that anyone else would notice. But something shifted inside me, and maybe inside her too. I saw how love doesn't erase loss. It doesn't replace regret. It doesn't fix the past. But it can sit quietly beside all of that, without asking for permission. I carry her in moments now. The way she laughs when she doesn't mean to. The tiredness she hides until it slips out. The way her eyes linger a second too long when she's about to leave. It's not about ownership or certainty or even future plans. It's about the fragile truth we found in each other. That even broken hearts still beat. Maybe that's what love really is. Not fireworks, not fate, not perfection. Just two people, both a little lost, willing to lean into the silence together. And if you've been listening this far, maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you felt it too. That one person who makes the world quieter, heavier, more bearable, all at once. So I'll leave you with this. Sometimes the things that change us most aren't loud or obvious. They're small. A glance, a touch, a question left hanging in the air. And if you've ever had a moment like that, something unspoken that stayed with you, I'd like to hear it. Because maybe the point of stories like this isn't to give answers. Maybe it's to remind us that we're not alone in the questions.